Welcome back to Pop Goes the 60s. I'm Matt Williamson, and today we're going to talk about an album that I'm sure every single one of you has seen, and that is Herb Alpert's Tijuana Brass, Whipped Cream and Other Delights. This album is probably the most famous album cover of the 60s, with some minor exceptions. It's right up there with the biggest of all time. And we're going to talk a little bit about how this got made, but more about the actress or the model that is in the picture, and that is Dolores Erickson. Now, before we talk about her, Herb Alpert had been around for a few years. This was his fourth album. He was a trumpet player, and he started out forming a label with Jerry Moss called A&M Records, and that was used to launch his career, essentially, which was for adult contemporary music. And the trumpet music they were playing was largely instrumental. Alpert was about 5 years older than the Beatles, so he appealed to a little bit of an older audience, and that's why I said easy listening or adult contemporary. And those are the charts he really scored high on, but he scored very high on the pop charts as well. So let's talk a little bit about the lady in the whipped cream. This is Dolores Erickson, and she was from Seattle. She began modeling as a teen and won several beauty pageants like Miss Maritime, Miss Longshoreman, and she also competed to be the Seafair Queen. Now, one of the interesting things about the Seafair Queen is that two other models also were contestants in that. I'm not sure if they won or not, but that was Dorothy Provine and Diane Cannon. All of them came from around the same area. And all three of them headed down to San Francisco to find work. Imagine being on that bus ride in between those three. But she got a job as a model, as a staff model at Macy's. And that's where she started a lot of her modeling career. That led to some work down in Los Angeles, and then she got signed to Paramount Pictures. In 1960, she was signed as a contract player and eventually landed roles in the next year or two on The Pleasure of His Company, featuring Fred Astaire and Debbie Reynolds, Love in a Goldfish Bowl, that was 1961, featuring Tommy Sands and Fabian, and finally in 1961, Ladies' Man, starring Jerry Lewis. So her movie career was mostly just bit parts, television as well. Her modeling career was where she had more of her success. She did a lot of Max Factor ads, fashion layouts. In between that, she did some of the movie stuff, but generally she was a print model. And she started doing some album covers as well. Being in the Los Angeles area, she started to make some connections and got used for some other album covers, which we'll look at in a little bit here. In 1965, she got a call from photographer Peter Whorf. Now, Whorf had done several other album covers and had used her before, and she was called in just like any other cover, and this was the cover that she was called in for. And this was actually shot in Whorf's garage. He had a studio in his garage. And for this cover, and this was completely Whorf's idea, so he just took it upon himself to do something rather sexy and rather revealing. So just to let you know, this isn't all whipped cream that she's covered in here. What they have here is like a Christmas tree skirt, which is like a white fabric. They actually used whipped cream, but it started to melt under the lights, so they brought in shaving cream. So from her neck down, or I should say from her chest down, she's using shaving cream. There's actual dessert topping on her head. That's whipping cream. And she's tasting the whipping cream. So it didn't take very long to do this shoot, but she is wearing a white bikini with the straps down. But it gives the impression that she's nude under the cream, which she really isn't. And one of the interesting things about this is that she was 3 months pregnant, but she wasn't really showing yet. So with all this stuff on her, I guess it wouldn't have mattered much anyway. But she got paid $1,500 for this shoot and expenses paid to get to Los Angeles, which would be about $11,000 in today's dollars, which is pretty good work for a half a day or less. And when she got the outtakes and she saw what she was shot in, she was rather nervous about it, and it did shock her a little bit. In fact, her husband was a New York shoe manufacturer, and she thought he would be upset. So what she did is she had some proofs from the shoot, and she hid them behind the refrigerator at her friend's house so her husband wouldn't see them. Well, this album became such a huge hit. Her husband did see them, obviously, so I don't know what he felt about it. I'd love to get a quote of his. But Herb Alpert's reaction was that he said, wow, this is way too racy. When he saw Peter Whorf's concept and saw the photographs, he thought, this is a little too much. And he didn't feel that this cover really reflected the music on it. Now, Alpert's music was a little more, his big hit originally in '62 was The Lonely Bull. So he had this kind of Spanish feel that went along with the trumpet playing, and he didn't think that this really fit the music within. But he went along with it and he decided to give it a shot. And it was very fortuitous that he did because it became a huge hit. Now, this was his fourth album, and his first three albums actually charted very well. So Lonely Bull was number 10, Volume 2, 17, South of the Border was number 6, that was from 1964, and this was his first number 1 album. Now, there was 3 singles released from this record, and it was an immediate hit because obviously it's very striking. And the first single, though, was not a hit. In fact, it only charted at number 68, and that was on Billboard, but it charted at number 13 on the Easy Listening chart, and that was the single Whipped Cream. Now, the second single, Peanuts, didn't chart at all, but the third single proved to be the charm. A Taste of Honey was from the Music Man, and it was known to me from the Beatles' first album. So I knew that, but as a vocal. So this is an instrumental, and, you know, pretty light and airy. And it hit number 1 on the Easy Listening chart and number 7 on the Billboard Pop chart. So a huge hit, and that coincided with the release of the album. It was out, the album had already been out, but this really helped sell the album and get it really known and get it played on radio. Now, on the album chart, it hit number 1 on Billboard, and it was on the charts for 185 weeks. It was number 1 for 8 weeks. Now, let me show you the other albums that were number 1 in 1965. There are a total of 9 albums that had the number 1 position. So Mary Poppins was the biggest at 14 weeks, a couple of Beatle albums at 9, Whipped Cream at 8. So it was the 4th best charting album of the year. But I think it was the biggest selling album of the year. It sold in excess of 6 million copies. So we have the Beatles 6 with 6 weeks, Goldfinger and Out of Our Heads by the Stones, 3 weeks each, Sound of Music at 2 weeks, and the Elvis soundtrack, Roustabout, at 1 week. So this was outselling the Beatles, Sinatra, and the Stones. If you count the Beatles' help, there are 5 soundtracks that spent time at number 1. So that's kind of interesting. And only one other than the rock band, other than the Beatles, only one rock band, and that would be the Rolling Stones. I wouldn't call Elvis a rock artist at this time with those soundtracks. Those were a little more, what would you call them? I think those would be kind of adult contemporary as well. He found his niche. He could still make money making these movies, and he was going for the money, not the critical acclaim, obviously. So the thing about this album is Herb Alpert was basically just a studio group. The Tijuana Brass was made up of a lot of the Los Angeles session musicians. Alpert himself always played trumpet, but the success of this album necessitated him to form a touring band. So he did that and began to tour and started doing very well. It's funny that this album was so popular that when he would play music from it or he would get requests, he would say, "Sorry folks, I can't play the album cover." So he continued to perform for many, many years, and he had a lot of other hit albums in the 60s, but this was the one. He didn't try to repeat this cover. He went back to his more typical covers with him on the front and left this one to be kind of a standalone one-shot. So he had 2 hit singles from this album, one big hit, one moderate hit, I guess you'd say. But 2 of the other songs from this album started to get used on The Dating Game, and his music started to be associated with that. So it just fitted perfectly. Now let's look at some of the other covers that Dolores Erickson appeared on. So this is 1965, but she started doing album covers all the way back to 1960. So here we got Roger Williams' Temptation. This is 1960. This is the Kingston Trio. So here she is, a painter here, Sold Out. This is also 1960, I believe. Nat King Cole, The Touch of Your Lips. This is 1961. Jonah Jones, Jazz Bonus. This is a great cover. I love this shot of her. I believe this is 1962. And then here we've got Piano Witchcraft of Cy Coleman. So here she's dolled up in a little yellow witch outfit here. And that is 1963. And then in 65 was her next one, which was Whipped Cream. Then in 66 we have Guantanamera by the Sandpipers. Here she is here. In 66 we've got Pancho Purcell and his Bambuca Players. This is a sharp one with a bikini of her. This is also 66, correct? Now here's one, Bill Irwin. This is 1967. And we see this is the same photo shoot, if I can find it here, as this one. So it's like, what if you got already shot so we don't have to hire anybody else? So they use the same photo shoot for a completely different artist. In this case, it's Bill Irwin, who I had never heard of before. So she had done a few others as well. I don't have every one of her album covers, but those are the main ones, and she always looks good in every one. One of the things that's probably most interesting about this album is the amount of parody covers that it launched. I'm sure many of you have seen parody covers of this photo shoot, and I'm going to just show you a couple that I have here. This is Pat Cooper. He's a comedian, Spaghetti Sauce and Other Delights. This is probably the first one that I'm aware of. This is 1966. So that one is clearly parody. In this one, this is Peter Nero plays a salute to Herb Alpert in Tijuana Brass. So here he's using kind of the masthead here and the colors from the logo from the album, but it's not really a parody. But I just happened to see this somewhere, and I'm like, wait a minute. So I picked that up. Now here's probably my favorite parody. This is a disco group called Sweet Cream and Other Delights. Contains the smash disco single, I Don't Know What to Do. It wasn't a smash single. In fact, I'd never heard of it before. I didn't see it on any charts at all. But this is a little more, slightly more risque, topless shot with the cream spread in the appropriate places. But this is a trio of singers. And this is, I got this and it was still sealed. I've never opened it. I don't know that I'll ever listen to it. I guess the other one, the most famous one I can think of that's a parody, is the Soul Asylum one. So there's that one, and there's just tons. And I'm sure you've seen many, but I can only list a few. This album has appeared in television shows and movies. One television show that I noticed that it appeared in was Charlie's Angels.
Relax and enjoy.
Very good. That means you win the grand prize today, which is...
A poke in the eye with a sharp stick.
the original long-playing recording of Whipped Cream by the Tijuana Brass.
That episode is from 1976-77. That's the first season. It's called Dancing in the Dark. And you don't get a shot of the front of the album, but it gets mentioned. They have it in their hand there. In that show, if you like to see Farrah dance, doing some disco dancing, you're going to find her doing it in there. It's kind of funny. And then on movies, this album appeared in The Big Lebowski, The Boondock Saints, The Honeymoon Killers, and the TV show Freaks and Geeks, which was always a favorite show of mine from the late 90s. All right. So one of the things that I also noticed, because I collected these albums for a while. Why did you collect so many albums of this, Matt? Well, because about 15, 20 years ago, I started seeing these everywhere. They're so cheap, like $1 a piece. So I figured, well, I'm gonna buy them all, you know, corner the market, control the pricing. But I gave up after about 6 copies. So this was actually printed in several different variations. I'm kind of into the print variations. So this is the one that I find most common, which is the green type with the yellow, A Taste of Honey, and then this lettering in here, though you can't see it that well, is blue. That is the norm, the kind of the regular standard printing. This particular one has no yellow, print is darker, and this is just blue type in here. Then I happen to see this one, which is all yellow type. Now this is on the quality label. This is a budget Canadian label, and the backs are different on these. I knew this was different, so I picked it up. It was rather cheap. These can't be too expensive. To get a still sealed one, I guess that might be a few bucks. Now, I'm sure everybody has a story of this album. And I've got a couple stories. I had a friend of mine, we were talking about this one time. She came over and she saw this album in my collection. And she said, oh, I had that. My grandparents, or we used to play that at my parents' house or something, and that was the only album they had. So it brought back many memories for her. So I gave her one of my copies, and she appreciated that. This particular one that I hold in my hand here, with the shrink wrap on it, all you VC nerds out there, I'm keeping the shrink wrap on this one. This is actually one from the family. This belonged to my father. And the story behind it is my grandfather, his dad, took him off for his birthday to the record shop. And my dad picked out this album. Now, if you knew my grandfather, super conservative. And I was surprised my dad had the guts to actually pick this out. And I remember he told me, he's like, yeah, Grandpa, he didn't say anything, but he bought it for him. And this is the actual one. My dad didn't keep that good of care of his records, so this one's pretty beat up, but somehow the cellophane stayed on it. So this one's kind of a special one in my collection. So that is my story of whipped cream and other delights. Now, I'm sure everybody watching may have a story of their own. Feel free to share it in the comments below. It's just one of those great conversation starters when anybody sees this album, they start talking about it. So it's always been a fun conversation piece for me. Now, Dolores Erickson, she had, some years ago I saw online where she had signed some copies. Somebody had her do a public appearance where she was autographing copies. So that was really cool. And I thought it was just a fun topic to talk about the model. And her having been on so many album covers, it just tells kind of an interesting story. And it's just very 60s. So if you like that, and you like the things I do here on my channel on Pop Goes the 60s, feel free to check out my Patreon subscription if you want to help out this channel in a bigger way. I've got a website with a lot of fun merchandise, so you can find that at popgoesthe60s.com. And if you want to support in a very simple way, just hit that subscribe button. See you next time here on Pop Goes the 60s.